You ever seen a man sit that still when the world's trying to push him over? The question drifted low across the diner's cracked asphalt, swallowed almost instantly by the rumble of engines as a pack of Harleys rolled in, chrome flashing under the late afternoon sun, heat waves bending the air like glass. The smell hit first: gasoline, hot rubber, and dust, followed by laughter that didn't belong in a quiet place like this. William Carter sat alone near the edge of the lot, a chipped ceramic mug cooling beside him on a metal table, his weathered hands resting lightly on the handle of a worn wooden cane, one leg stiff, unmoving. His jacket faded to a color that used to be olive but now looked like memory. He didn't look up when the first bike cut its engine 10 feet away, didn't flinch when boots hit the ground in heavy, deliberate steps, didn't react when the shadow fell over him like a storm cloud rolling in too fast. "Hey," the man said, voice young and edged with something sharp, something unearned. "You lost, Grandpa." A few more laughs, louder this time, echoing off the diner windows where a couple of onlookers paused mid-conversation, unsure whether to look away or stay frozen in place. Carter lifted his eyes then, slow, steady, pale blue, catching the light in a way that made it hard to tell if they were tired or simply distant, like he was looking through the man instead of at him. No anger, no fear, just stillness, the kind that made noise feel out of place. The biker, Jake Harlow, though no one here said his name out loud, shifted his weight, boots scraping against the gravel as he circled half a step closer, sizing up a man who didn't react the way people were supposed to. "Didn't hear me?" he pressed, glancing back at his crew for validation, for the easy approval that came with pushing someone smaller, quieter, older. "I said you lost." Carter's gaze drifted past him for just a second, toward the highway stretching out beyond the diner, sun hanging low over miles of empty road, wind tugging at the loose edge of a torn patch on his sleeve. He had heard worse, far worse. He had stood in places where silence meant survival, where the wrong word cost more than pride. This wasn't that, not even close. So he said nothing, and somehow, that made it worse. Jake's grin tightened, not fading but changing, turning into something more deliberate, more personal, as if the lack of reaction had challenged him in a way he couldn't quite explain. He reached out without asking, fingers brushing the thin chain resting against Carter's collar, and gave it a small, testing pull. A dull piece of metal slipped into view, a worn dog tag, edges softened by time, surface scratched until the letters were almost ghosts. "What's this?" Jake muttered, lifting it higher, squinting like he expected something impressive and found nothing but age. Behind the diner glass, a waitress paused mid-step, her hand tightening around a coffee pot as she watched the scene unfold, something in her expression shifting, like she recognized a pattern she couldn't quite name. Outside, the wind picked up just enough to stir the dust, carrying a faint, distant sound from somewhere far off, low, rhythmic, almost too subtle to notice. Carter's hand rose slowly, not to grab the tag back, not to stop anything, just to rest lightly against the chain as it hung between them, his fingers steady despite the years, despite the weight of whatever that small piece of metal carried. "Careful with that," he said quietly, voice rough like gravel but calm, measured, the kind of tone that didn't ask for respect and didn't need to. Jake scoffed, rolling his shoulders, completely missing the shift, completely unaware that somewhere beyond the horizon, something had already started moving. The chain swayed gently between Jake Harlow's fingers, catching the last slant of sunlight, its surface dull and unreadable, and for a moment he frowned like it had failed to impress him properly. "That is it," he said, tilting his head, voice loud enough for the others to hear. "No rank, no shine, no nothing. Just scrap metal." A few of the bikers chuckled, boots shifting on gravel, leather creaking as they leaned in, drawn to the easy spectacle of a man who refused to react the way they expected. William Carter did not pull the tag back. He did not raise his voice. He simply let his hand rest. There, fingers lightly touching the chain, as if grounding himself in something far beyond this parking lot. "It is not for show," he said, each word measured, calm, almost lost beneath the idle ticking of cooling engines. Jake let out a short laugh, shaking his head. "Everything is for show," he replied, glancing at his crew. "That is the whole point." But there was a flicker there, small and quick, something unsettled by the way the old man spoke, like he was stating a fact instead of offering an opinion. Across the lot, inside the diner, Emily Ross had stopped pretending to wipe down the counter. The rag sat still in her hand as she watched through the glass, her eyes narrowing slightly. She had seen men like Jake before, loud and restless, filling space with noise, but the man sitting across from him did not fit any pattern she recognized. It was the stillness that caught her, the way he seemed untouched by the pressure around him, like the moment had no weight at all. Her gaze shifted to the dog tag, to the way the old man's fingers rested against it. Not protective, not defensive, just certain. Something about that made her chest tighten. Outside, the wind picked up again, carrying dust across the asphalt in thin, twisting lines, and beneath it, faint but steady, that distant sound grew a fraction louder, a low rhythmic pulse that blended with the world until it did not. Jake did not notice. He let the tag drop back against Carter's chest with a soft tap and took a step closer instead, invading space with deliberate ease. "You know," he said, lowering his voice just enough to make it feel personal. "People wear things like that to be seen, to be respected. But respect, you earn that right here." He tapped his own chest, smirking. Carter's eyes followed the movement briefly, then returned to Jake's face, steady as ever. "No," he said quietly. "You do not." The answer landed softer than anything else in the moment, but it carried farther, slipping under the noise, under the laughter, under the performance. One of the bikers shifted uncomfortably, glancing toward the road without knowing why. Emily felt it too, that subtle shift, like the air had changed. Pressure. Her hand moved before her mind caught up, reaching for the phone tucked beneath the counter. She hesitated for half a second, staring at the screen, then scrolled to a contact she had not used in years, her fingers suddenly less steady than she liked. Outside, Jake exhaled through his nose, amused, dismissive, already turning to say something to his crew, already convinced he had read the situation completely. Behind him, Carter adjusted his grip on the cane, not to stand, not to move, just to settle it back into place, his gaze drifting once more toward the horizon where the sun hovered low and the distant sound, no longer quite hidden, rolled closer with each passing second. Emily's thumb hovered over the call button for a fraction too long, her pulse louder in her ears than the muted hum of conversation behind her, and then she pressed it, lifting the phone slowly to her ear as if the act itself carried weight she did not fully understand. Outside, the air felt different now, tighter, like the space between moments had narrowed. Jake Harlow exhaled sharply, rolling his neck as he stepped back half a pace, already bored with the lack of reaction, already looking for something louder, easier, something that would give him the response he expected. "You are a quiet one," he muttered, glancing at his crew, forcing a grin that did not quite reach his eyes. "Guess that comes with age." A couple of the others laughed again, though softer this time, their attention flickering, not fully on him anymore, not fully anywhere. Carter did not answer. He had shifted his gaze again, not to Jake, not to the ground, but past everything, toward the long stretch of highway where the horizon shimmered under the heat. His fingers rested lightly against the dog tag now, thumb brushing its worn surface in a slow, almost absent motion, like he was remembering something that did not belong to this place. On the other end of Emily's call, the line clicked once, then a voice answered, crisp and controlled, the kind that carried authority without needing to raise volume. "This is Cole." Emily swallowed, her eyes fixed on the man outside. I am sorry to call like this," she said, her voice lower than usual, careful. "But there is someone here. An older man. Name might be William Carter." There was a pause, not long, but heavy, like something had shifted miles away. "Where are you?" the voice asked. Emily gave the location quickly, glancing through the glass as Jake paced a few steps, boots crunching gravel, still talking, still filling space. "He is outside," she added quietly, "and I do not think anyone here understands who he is." The silence on the line stretched for half a second more, then the voice returned, sharper now, edged with something that had not been there before. "Stay inside. Do not interfere." The call ended. Emily lowered the phone slowly, her hand no longer steady, her gaze locked on the man at the table who had not moved more than a few inches since all of this began. Outside, Jake finally turned away, throwing a casual gesture to his crew as if dismissing the moment entirely. "Come on," he said, loud again, reclaiming control. "Nothing to see here." But one of the younger bikers hesitated, his head tilting slightly as he looked toward the road, brow furrowing. "You hear that?" he asked. Jake waved him off. "It is just traffic." It was not traffic. The sound had grown, low and steady, a distant rhythm that did not match the highway, not the occasional car, not the empty stretch beyond the diner. Carter heard it clearly now. His eyes did not change, his posture did not shift, but there was the faintest exhale, slow and measured, like a man who had been waiting not for something to happen, but for something to arrive. The wind carried the sound closer, the faint pulse of rotors beginning to separate from the background, and for the first time, the laughter in the parking lot faltered without anyone quite knowing why. The sound was unmistakable now, no longer a distant murmur but a steady, rhythmic thunder rolling across the open sky, deep and deliberate, like something with purpose. It did not belong to the highway, did not match the scattered flow of passing cars or the idle hum of engines cooling in the lot. It was heavier than that, controlled, precise. One of the bikers shifted his stance, boots scraping against the gravel as he looked up instinctively, squinting into the glare of the lowering sun. "That is not traffic," he said again, quieter this time. Jake Harlow followed his gaze for half a second, then scoffed, brushing it off with a wave of his hand as if dismissing the feeling itself. "Relax," he muttered. "You are hearing things." But even as he said it, his voice lacked the easy confidence it carried before, edged now with something tighter, something less certain. The others felt it too, though none of them said it out loud. The laughter had faded, replaced by a restless shifting, eyes drifting toward the horizon without fully committing to the thought forming behind them. William Carter remained seated, unmoved, his hand still resting lightly against the worn dog tag, thumb tracing the same slow, familiar path across its surface. The wind tugged gently at his jacket, lifting the edge of the old patch stitched to the sleeve, revealing just enough of its faded outline to suggest something once precise, once important, now softened by time. His gaze stayed fixed on the distance, not searching, not questioning, simply waiting. Inside the diner, Emily Ross stepped closer to the glass, her breath catching slightly as the sound grew stronger, more defined, each pulse of it pressing into the air like a signal that could not be ignored. She had heard helicopters before, living this close to the highway, but this was different. There was a discipline to it, a pattern that did not wander, did not drift. It moved with intent. Outside, the first shadow passed over the far edge of the lot, subtle at first, just a flicker against the sunlit pavement, but enough to draw every eye upward in unspoken synchronization. The rotors cut through the air now, sharp and distinct, sending a ripple through the dust that skated across the ground in thin spirals. Jake's posture changed, almost imperceptibly, shoulders squaring, chin lifting as if trying to reassert control over something that was no longer his to manage. "It is just a flyover," he said, louder than necessary, forcing the explanation into the space between them. No one answered. The helicopter came into view over the highway, low and steady, matte dark against the sky, its presence filling the horizon with a weight that could not be dismissed. It did not pass by. It slowed. The shift was subtle but undeniable, the nose angling slightly, the path adjusting with quiet precision toward the diner, toward the small cluster of bikes, and the single man seated at the edge of it all. Carter did not look surprised. He did not rise. He simply closed his hand gently around the dog tag, the metal disappearing into his palm as the sound of the rotors pressed down over the lot, flattening every other noise into silence. And for the first time since they had arrived, Jake Harlow did not have anything to say. The helicopter did not circle. It committed. Its descent was controlled, deliberate, the kind of movement that erased doubt instead of creating it. The rotor wash hit the ground first, a rolling wave of wind that swept across the diner lot, lifting dust into the air and rattling the loose metal sign above the entrance. Jackets flapped, loose gravel skittered across the asphalt, and the low hum of engines still ticking from the parked bikes was drowned out completely. Every eye was locked upward now. No one laughed. No one spoke. Jake Harlow squinted into the wind, one hand rising instinctively to shield his eyes, his earlier confidence thinning with each passing second. "What the hell?" he muttered. But the words were carried away before they could land. The helicopter hovered just beyond the edge of the lot, close enough now that its presence filled everything, close enough that the details became clear: the dark paint, the clean lines, the absence of anything decorative. This was not for show. This was function, precision, purpose. William Carter remained exactly where he was. His posture did not change. His grip on the cane did not tighten. The only movement was the slight tilt of his head, just enough to follow the aircraft's final adjustment as it settled lower, the skids touching down with a firmness that felt final, like the end of a sentence. Inside the diner, Emily Ross stepped back from the glass, her breath catching as the realization settled fully into place. This was not coincidence. This was response. Outside, the rotor blades slowed incrementally, the thunder easing into a heavy, rhythmic chop that still pressed against the air, still held the moment in place. The side door opened. It was not rushed. It was not chaotic. It was precise. One figure stepped down, then another, their movements synchronized without needing to be, boots hitting the ground with quiet certainty. They wore no visible insignia that the bikers could read, no loud markers of authority, but something in their posture made it unmistakable. They were not here by accident. They were here for a reason. Jake's stance shifted again, his weight no longer planted with the same ease, his shoulders tightening as he watched the figures approach. Each step measured, each movement controlled. "You know these guys?" one of the bikers asked under his breath, not taking his eyes off them. Jake did not answer. For the first time since he had walked into the lot, he did not have an immediate response, did not have a line ready to fill the silence. The lead figure stopped a few feet away from Carter, close enough that the wind from the slowing rotors still tugged at his uniform, close enough that the entire lot seemed to hold its breath. For a fraction of a second, nothing happened. Then the man straightened fully, his posture snapping into something sharper, something unmistakable. His hand came up in a clean, deliberate motion. A salute. Not casual. Not symbolic. Exact. Behind him, the others mirrored the movement in perfect unison. The gesture cut through the moment with more force than any words could have. Jake Harlow felt it before he understood it. A sudden, hollow drop in his chest as the pieces failed to align with anything he had expected. No one had told him who this old man was. No one had needed to. Carter looked up slowly, meeting the man's eyes, and for the first time since this had begun, there was the faintest shift in his expression, not pride, not satisfaction, just recognition, quiet and complete, as if this moment had been inevitable all along. The salute held in the air longer than anyone expected, not as a performance, not as a show, but as something. Anchored in discipline so deep it did not bend to the confusion around it. The rotor blades above slowed further, their heavy rhythm fading into a low mechanical whisper, but the weight of that single gesture did not lift with the noise. It stayed, pressing into the silence that had swallowed the entire lot. Jake Harlow stood frozen where he was, his earlier smirk gone, replaced by something tighter, something uncertain. He glanced at his crew, searching for the same easy confidence he had fed off minutes ago, but it was not there. No one laughed now. No one moved. One of the younger bikers shifted his stance, eyes darting between the uniformed men and the old veteran, as if trying to piece together a story that had already been written long before he arrived. The lead SEAL lowered his hand slowly, but his posture remained locked, precise, his gaze fixed on William Carter with a level of respect that could not be mistaken or ignored. "Sir," he said, his voice calm, controlled, carrying clearly even in the fading echo of the rotors, "we apologize for the delay." The words landed with quiet authority, each one measured, each one deliberate. Carter's hand eased off the dog tag, letting it fall back against his chest with a soft, almost inaudible tap. He looked at the man in front of him, his expression unchanged except for that same faint trace of recognition, like 2 points in time had just aligned without needing explanation. "You are right on time," Carter replied, his voice low but steady, the kind of tone that did not need volume to carry weight. Behind the lead SEL, the others remained still, their presence forming a silent perimeter, not aggressive, not threatening, just absolute. It was not a show of force. It was something else entirely, something that made space around it. Jake swallowed, the motion small but visible, his mind catching up to the reality unfolding in front of him. "Hey," he said, forcing his voice back into the moment, trying to reclaim something, anything. "We were just talking. No problem here." The words sounded thin, even to him, lacking the sharp edge they had carried before. The lead SEL did not turn immediately. He did not acknowledge Jake right away. Instead, he took one measured step closer to Carter, his attention still fully on the seated veteran. "Commander Ryan Cole," he said quietly, as if the introduction was for Carter alone. "We received a call." Carter gave a slight nod, barely more than a movement of acknowledgement. "I figured you might," he said. Only then did Cole shift his gaze, turning his head just enough to look toward Jake and the others. It was not an aggressive look. It did not need to be. It was steady, direct, and completely unshaken, the kind of gaze that measured without speaking, that assessed without asking permission. Jake felt it land, felt the weight of it settle in a way he could not deflect with humor or noise. For the first time, he stepped back, not by choice, but because something in him understood the distance now required. Around them, the air seemed to settle, the dust drifting back down, the last traces of rotor wash fading into stillness. But the shift had already happened. Whatever control had existed minutes ago was gone, replaced by something quieter, heavier, and far more final. Carter adjusted his grip on the cane again, not to stand, not to leave, just to settle himself as he always had, his gaze moving briefly across the lot, taking in the silence that had replaced the earlier noise. And for a moment, it was clear to anyone watching that nothing about this situation had surprised him at all. The silence did not break all at once. It shifted, slowly, like the air after a storm had passed, but the weight of it still lingered in the ground. Jake Harlow stood there, his hands no longer sure where to rest, his posture caught somewhere between standing his ground and stepping away entirely. The confidence that had carried him minutes ago had nowhere to land now. It had nothing to push against. Commander Ryan Cole did not raise his voice. He did not step forward again. He simply held that steady gaze, the kind that did not challenge, did not provoke, but made it impossible to pretend nothing had changed. "Is there an issue here?" Cole asked finally, his tone even, controlled, leaving no room for interpretation but offering no accusation. Either. Jake blinked, the question catching him off guard not because of what it asked, but because of how it was asked. There was no edge to it. No anger. Just clarity. "No," Jake said quickly, almost too quickly, the word coming out sharper than he intended. "No issue. We were just leaving." Behind him, one of the bikers nodded, already taking a step back toward the line of motorcycles, the earlier bravado replaced by a quiet urgency to create distance. The others followed, not in panic, not in chaos, but in a slow, collective retreat that felt less like a decision and more like an understanding settling into place. Carter watched them for a brief moment, his eyes calm, unreadable, not judging, not lingering. Then his attention returned to Cole, as if the rest of the scene had already passed in his mind. "You did not have to come all this way," Carter said, his voice low, steady, carrying just enough to reach without effort. Cole's expression did not change, but there was a subtle shift in his posture, something almost imperceptible softening in the rigid precision. "With respect, sir," he replied, "we did." The words were simple, but they carried a weight that stretched far beyond the parking lot, beyond the diner, beyond the moment itself. Carter held his gaze for a second longer, then gave a small nod, accepting the answer without argument. The wind had settled now, the last traces of dust drifting back to the ground, the world returning to its natural rhythm, but it felt different, as if something unseen had been acknowledged and quietly set back into place. Inside the diner, Emily Ross let out a breath she had not realized she was holding, her hand still resting on the counter, her eyes fixed on the scene outside. She did not fully understand what she had just witnessed, but she knew it mattered. Outside, Jake reached his bike, his movements slower than before, his thoughts clearly somewhere else, replaying the last few minutes in a way that no longer fit the version of events he had started with. He glanced back once, just once, toward the old man and the group of men standing around him, their presence calm but absolute. For a brief moment, their eyes met. Carter did not react. He did not need to. Jake looked away first, swinging his leg over the bike without another word. The engine started again, one by one, the sound rising but lacking the earlier edge, lacking the same careless confidence. As the bikes rolled out onto the highway, disappearing into the distance they had come from, the space they left behind felt quieter than before, not empty, but settled. Cole took a step back then, just enough to give Carter space again, his posture still precise, still respectful. "Do you require anything, sir?" he asked. Carter shook his head slightly, his hand resting once more on the cane, his gaze drifting back toward the horizon. "No," he said. "Everything is exactly where it should be." The last echo of the engines faded into the distance, swallowed by the open stretch of highway until there was nothing left but the quiet hum of the afternoon and the soft ticking of cooling metal. The diner parking lot, moments ago filled with tension and noise, settled into a stillness that felt heavier than silence, as if the ground itself had absorbed everything that had just happened and was holding on to it. Commander Ryan Cole remained where he stood, his posture no less precise, though the urgency that had carried him here had eased into something quieter, more deliberate. He glanced briefly toward the horizon where the motorcycles had disappeared, then back to William Carter, his expression composed but carrying a depth that was not visible the most. "We will stand down unless you request otherwise," Cole said, his voice low, respectful, each word placed with care. Carter did not answer immediately. His gaze remained fixed on the distance, where the sun now hovered lower, casting long shadows across the asphalt, stretching everything just a little further than before. The light caught the edge of his dog tag as it rested against his chest, the worn metal reflecting a faint, uneven glow. His hand moved once more, not to hide it, not to display it, but simply to steady it as the breeze shifted again. "No need," he said after a moment, his tone unchanged, steady as it had been from the beginning. "You have done enough." Cole inclined his head slightly, accepting the words not as dismissal, but as acknowledgement. Behind him, the others relaxed by degrees so small they were almost invisible, the tension leaving their shoulders without breaking the discipline that defined them. They were still present, still aware, but the moment that required their arrival had passed. Inside the diner, Emily Ross stepped outside slowly, the screen door creaking softly behind her, the sound almost out of place in the quiet. She hesitated near the edge of the lot, unsure if she should approach, unsure if she even belonged in the same space as whatever this was. Carter noticed her before she spoke, his eyes shifting just enough to acknowledge her presence. "You made the call," he said, not as a question, but as a simple statement. Emily nodded, her voice catching slightly. I thought someone should know," she said. Carter regarded her for a moment, then gave a small nod, a gesture so subtle it could have been missed if not for the weight behind it. "You were right," he said. "No praise, no exaggeration, just truth." Emily exhaled softly, something in her shoulders easing, though she could not fully explain why. Cole glanced between them, understanding passing silently through the space without needing words. He stepped back once more, giving Carter a clear path, a clear choice, his presence no longer pressing into the moment, but supporting it from the edges. The helicopter behind them idled quietly now, its blades slowing further, the sound fading into a soft mechanical whisper. Carter adjusted his cane, this time with intention, his movements deliberate but unhurried as he prepared to stand. The act itself was simple, but it carried a quiet dignity that drew every eye once more. He rose carefully, steady, his posture aligning with a discipline that had never left him, not even after all the years. For a brief moment, he stood there, looking out across the lot, across the road, across something only he could see. Then he turned slightly, just enough to face Cole again. "Take care of them," he said, his voice low, almost reflective. Cole met his gaze, understanding immediately. "Always, sir," he replied. And with that, the moment closed, not with noise, not with spectacle, but with a silence that carried more weight than anything that had come before. The light had shifted by the time William Carter took his first step forward, the sun now lower, casting long golden lines across the pavement that stretched beneath his feet like quiet markers of time. The world around him had returned to its ordinary rhythm, but something in the air remained changed, as if the moment had left behind an imprint that could not be seen, only felt. Commander Ryan Cole watched him move with the same steady focus, not out of concern, but out of respect, the kind that did not fade when the urgency was gone. Carter did not rush. He never had. Each step was measured, grounded, the cane touching down with a soft, consistent rhythm that matched the calm in his expression. He reached the edge of the lot and paused for just a second, his gaze lifting toward the horizon where the road stretched out into the distance, empty now, quiet. Behind him, the helicopter continued its slow descent into stillness, the blades easing down until the last trace of motion faded into silence. The team began to withdraw with the same precision they had arrived. No wasted movement, no unnecessary sound, their presence folding back into the background as if they had never disrupted it at all. Emily Ross stood near the diner door, watching, her arms loosely crossed, not out of tension, but out of something closer to reflection. She had seen something she could not explain, something that did not fit into the everyday world she knew, and yet it felt more real than anything else that had happened that day. Carter turned his head slightly, just enough to acknowledge her again, and for a brief moment, their eyes met. There was no need for words. The understanding had already passed between them. Cole approached once more, stopping a respectful distance away, his posture still exact, though the intensity of the moment had softened into something quieter, something enduring. "Transportation is ready, sir," he said, gesturing subtly toward the waiting aircraft. Carter followed the motion with his eyes, then shook his head gently. "Not today," he replied. "I have somewhere else to be." Cole accepted the answer without hesitation, giving a small nod that carried both acknowledgement and something deeper, something personal. "Understood," he said. Carter adjusted his grip on the cane one final time, then stepped forward onto the narrow strip of road that led away from the diner, away from the moment that had drawn so much attention without ever asking for it. He did not look back. He did not need to. The weight of what had happened did not follow him. It stayed behind, settled into the place where it belonged. The wind picked up again, lighter now, carrying with it the faint sounds of the world returning to normal, distant traffic, a door closing, a voice calling from inside the diner. Cole remained where he was for a moment longer, watching the figure grow smaller against the fading light, his expression unreadable to anyone but those who understood what it meant. Then, without a word, he turned, signaling his team with a simple motion, and they moved as one, stepping back toward the helicopter, their presence already dissolving into the quiet. Emily lingered at the door, her gaze following Carter until he disappeared beyond the bend in the road, until there was nothing left but the memory of a man who had never needed to prove who he was. And as the last of the light slipped below the horizon, the silence that remained did not feel empty. It felt earned. Some men do not ask for respect. They carry it with them, long after the world forgets to look.